Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The faint laughter in the dark isn't my own. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Echoes of the Past. The sky hung low, a blanket of gray clouds smothering the tiny town of Hollow Creek. Emma stared at the looming silhouette of her childhood home, a place she'd vowed never to return to. But life had a twisted sense of irony. After the breakup and the cold, indifferent funeral for her estranged mother, this crumbling relic was all she had left. The house stood at the end of a winding, overgrown path, hidden from the rest of the world by ancient trees that whispered secrets in the wind. Paint was peeling, windows clouded with dust, and the porch sagged like a tired old man. A bitter breeze swept through the branches, sending a shiver down Emma's spine as she fumbled for the key. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. The floorboards creaked under her feet, each step echoing in the silence like a ghostly whisper. The walls, once a warm yellow, were now stained with time, and the wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips. Shadows clung to the corners, stubbornly refusing to be chased away by the dim light filtering through the dirty windows. Emma dropped her bags in the foyer, her heart pounding louder than the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. She'd always hated that clock. Its chimes were like the heartbeat of the house, steady, relentless, a reminder that time was slipping away. She was back in the place where everything had gone wrong, where her childhood had ended with a scream and the sound of laughter that didn't belong. She tried to shake the feeling off, blaming it on fatigue and the emotional toll of the past few weeks. But as she moved through the house, the memories she'd buried began to resurface. The sound of her mother's voice, harsh and distant, mingled with that of a child's laughter. Her laughter echoed faintly in her mind. It had been so long since she'd thought of that day, the day everything changed. As night fell, the house seemed to come alive with the sounds of settling wood and the sighs of the wind outside. Emma curled up on the faded couch, exhaustion pulling her toward sleep, but just as she began to drift off, a sound cut through the quiet. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, but growing clearer, a soft, eerie laughter, like a child playing hide and seek in the dark. Emma's eyes snapped open, her breath catching in her throat. The laughter echoed through the house, coming from the shadows that seemed to pulse with life. She sat frozen, listening, her heart racing. It was just her imagination, she told herself. But deep down, she knew. She remembered that laughter, and it wasn't her own. Chapter 2. Unraveling the Mystery. The laughter faded, leaving Emma in a tense silence that seemed to press down on her like a weight. She remained still, listening for any other sounds, but all she could hear was the wild beating of her own heart. The darkness of the house wrapped around her, thick and suffocating, as if it had absorbed all the years of neglect and despair. She pushed herself off the couch, her legs unsteady, and moved through the house, flicking on every light she passed. The dim bulbs did little to chase away the shadows, but at least they offered some comfort, however small. The laughter had been real, she was certain of it now. But why had it returned after all these years? Emma's gaze drifted to the staircase leading up to the attic. She hadn't been up there since she was a child, since before the incident that had driven her family apart. Her mother had always kept that part of the house locked, claiming it was filled with nothing but useless junk. But something tugged at Emma, urging her to climb those creaking steps and face whatever lay hidden in the dusty, forgotten corners. The door to the attic groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a steep, narrow staircase. The air grew colder with each step she took, and the smell of mothballs and old wood filled her nose. At the top, the attic spread out before her, cloaked in darkness, except for a sliver of moonlight sneaking through a broken window. She reached for the light switch, but it did nothing. The bulb must have burned out long ago. Emma's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a landscape of old toys, broken furniture, and boxes stacked to the ceiling. She ran her hand over the dusty surfaces, her fingers leaving trails in the thick layers of neglect. This was where the past had been buried, locked away, and forgotten. But not anymore. As she sifted through the relics, her flashlight landed on a stack of journals, their leather covers cracked with age. The top one bore her mother's handwriting, the neat cursive familiar but filled with a tension Emma had never noticed before. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages, each line revealing a piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed. The entry spoke of a family curse, a darkness that had followed them for generations. Her mother had written of strange occurrences, voices in the night, and a sense of being watched that had grown stronger over time. The most chilling entry was dated shortly before Emma's birth, describing a ritual meant to protect her from the curse, though her mother had doubted its success. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had always dismissed her mother's fears as the ramblings of a troubled mind, but now, with the laughter still echoing in her memory, she wasn't so sure. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that was far darker than she had ever imagined. The sound of footsteps on the porch below broke her concentration. She nearly dropped the journal as she rushed to the attic window. Standing there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, was Tom. She hurried down the stairs and opened the door, forcing a smile. Tom's face was a mixture of concern and skepticism, the same expression he had worn when she'd called him earlier. "I came as soon as I could," he said, stepping inside and glancing around. "But, Emma, you have to admit, it's probably just the stress. Moving back here, everything with your mom." Emma shook her head, her grip tightening on the journal. "It's not just that, Tom. There's something wrong with this house, with my family. I found my mother's journals. She wrote about a curse, about something evil." Tom's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease breaking through his calm exterior. "A curse? Emma, come on, you don't really believe that, do you?" Her frustration bubbled to the surface, the isolation of the past few days making her voice sharp. "I don't know what I believe anymore, but I know what I heard, and I know what I'm finding out. I need your help to figure this out. Tom, please." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right. I'll help. But you have to promise me you'll keep an open mind about everything." Emma nodded, though deep down, she knew the only thing her mind was opening to was the darkness that seemed to be closing in around her. As they stood together in the shadowed foyer, the laughter began again, faint but unmistakable, sending a chill down both their spines. Emma locked eyes with Tom, seeing her own fear reflected in his gaze. The mystery of the house was unraveling, and whatever they found, at the end of it was something neither of them was prepared to face. Chapter 3. The laughter grows louder. The laughter haunted Emma, echoing through her mind like a persistent, mocking taunt. It no longer confined itself to the corners of the house. It followed her into the town, whispering in her ear as she walked the familiar streets of Hollow Creek. She could feel it creeping into her dreams, turning every moment of rest into a twisted nightmare. The once faint sound had grown louder, more distinct, like someone standing just behind her, laughing softly, waiting for her to turn around. But when she did, there was nothing. She barely recognized herself anymore. The shadows under her eyes deepened. Her once steady hands now trembled with the strain of sleepless nights. Emma had started snapping at Tom, their conversations growing tense and clipped. He didn't understand, couldn't understand. To him, it was all in her head, a byproduct of stress and grief. But to Emma, it was something far more sinister. The house had become a prison. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind sent her nerves on edge. The laughter was relentless, no longer content with the night, but now intruding into the daylight hours, mocking her sanity. She had taken to wandering the town, hoping to escape the sound that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. But even in the bustling streets, it was there, soft at first, then growing louder, always just out of reach. Tom tried to intervene, his concern growing with each passing day. He would find her pacing in the hallway, staring blankly at the walls, or rifling through her mother's old belongings with a frantic desperation that frightened him. "Emma, you need to rest. This isn't healthy," he pleaded, but his words fell on deaf ears. She couldn't rest. Not until she found the source of the laughter. She was certain that the answer lay within the dusty boxes and forgotten drawers of her mother's life. But the more she searched, the more she felt herself slipping away, as if the house was slowly devouring her spirit, one piece at a time. It was during one of these feverish searches that Emma stumbled upon the photograph. It was tucked away in an old, cracked leather album, hidden among the faded pages of family portraits. The picture was black and white, grainy with age, but the details were unmistakable. It showed a young Emma, no more than 8, standing in the attic's hidden room. But she wasn't alone. Beside her was a figure, a girl identical to her in every way, except for the smile. The girl's grin was wide, too wide, and her eyes gleamed with a malevolence that sent a chill down Emma's spine. The background of the photo matched the hidden room exactly, even though the room had been sealed for decades. The sinister version of herself seemed to be staring directly at her, mocking her with that unsettling smile. Emma recoiled, dropping the photograph as if it had burned her. Her pulse raced, fear coursing through her veins. She scrambled to pick it up, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the picture. This was proof. Proof that something was terribly wrong, that her memories were more than just fragments of a troubled past. But what did it mean? Was this doppelganger the source of the laughter, the darkness that had plagued her family for generations? The questions swirled in her mind, her grip on reality loosening with each passing moment. Tom's voice called from downstairs, snapping her back to the present. She shoved the photograph into her pocket, her heart pounding as she forced herself to calm down. But as she descended the stairs, the laughter followed her, louder and more insistent than ever. It was no longer a distant echo. It was right there, breathing down her neck, threatening to drive her mad. And in the shadows, just out of sight, the sinister smile from the photograph seemed to linger, watching, waiting. Chapter 4. The Secrets of the House. The photograph lingered in Emma's mind, twisting her thoughts into a tangled mess of fear and confusion. She kept it close, hidden in her pocket like a secret she wasn't ready to share, not even with Tom. The laughter hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown louder, following her every move, a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Tom arrived early, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. He had spent the night researching the house, and what he had found left him shaken. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and tense. They sat at the kitchen table, the sun struggling to break through the thick clouds outside, casting a gray pall over everything. Tom laid out a stack of old newspaper clippings and town records. "The house, it has a history, Emma. A dark one. The previous owners, every single one of them, died under tragic, unexplained circumstances. And there's something else. The laughter, you're not the first to hear it." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she sifted through the clippings. Stories of accidents, suicides, and disappearances filled the pages, each one more horrifying than the last. Common thread was the laughter always heard before the tragedy struck. It was as if the house itself was a harbinger of doom, its walls soaked in the pain of those who had lived there. "You knew," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and betrayal. "You knew about all of this, and you didn't tell me?" Tom's eyes widened in shock. "Emma, I just found out last night. I didn't know." "Don't lie to me, Tom." Emma shot up from her chair, the photograph clutched tightly in her hand. "You've been dismissing everything I've said, acting like I'm crazy, while all along you knew something was wrong with this house." Tom stood, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I swear I didn't know, Emma. I was trying to help, to protect you." "Protect me? From what? The truth?" Emma's voice cracked as she fought back tears. "I'm losing my mind, Tom, and you've been treating me like I am delusional when I'm the only one who seems to see what's happening." The confrontation hung heavy between them, the air thick with tension. Tom's expression softened, and he reached out to her. "Emma, please, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. Let's figure this out together." But Emma pulled away, her paranoia deepening. "I don't need your help," she snapped, storming out of the kitchen. She needed space, time to think. The house's secrets were closing in on her, and she couldn't afford to trust anyone, not even Tom. That night, as she lay in bed, sleep eluded her once again. Instead, she was pulled into a vivid flashback, the memories rushing back with startling clarity. She was 8 years old, playing in the attic with a friend who had vanished without a trace. They had been laughing, playing hide and seek, when suddenly everything went dark. The laughter echoed around them, but it wasn't their own. It was the same laughter that haunted her now, chilling and cruel. Emma jolted awake, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The memory was too real, too vivid to dismiss as a mere dream. She needed to know more, to uncover the truth of what had happened all those years ago. Drawn to the attic, she climbed the stairs, her feet moving almost of their own accord. The hidden room loomed before her, the door ajar as if inviting her in. She stepped inside, the cold air biting at her skin. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her with a force that made her jump. Panic surged through her as the laughter grew deafening, reverberating off the walls. She spun around, desperate to find an escape, but there was none. In a frenzy, she grabbed the nearest object, a small, heavy statuette, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a loud crash, splintering into a million pieces. Behind the broken shards, a hidden compartment was revealed. Inside, she found a small, worn diary, the pages yellowed with age. Scrawled across the front in a child's handwriting was the name of her missing friend. Emma's hands shook as she opened the diary, her heart pounding as the words inside began to unravel the terrible truth of the house's secrets and the sinister force that had claimed her friend so many years ago. Chapter 5. Descent into Madness. Emma sat on the cold attic floor, the tattered diary open in her trembling hands. Each word felt like a knife, cutting deeper into her fragile psyche. The diary told a chilling tale, one that mirrored her own unraveling reality. It spoke of two friends, inseparable until jealousy twisted their bond into something dark and dangerous. The entries began innocently enough, but soon the friend's voice turned desperate, pleading, as if she knew she was being watched, hunted by something neither of them understood. Emma could barely breathe as she read the final entries, each one more frantic than the last. The handwriting grew messier, the words trailing off into incoherent scribbles. The friend spoke of a deadly game they played, one that ended with her disappearance. The laughter, the same laughter that now haunted Emma, had filled the house on that day, just as it did now. Suddenly, A burst of laughter echoed through the attic, loud and jarring, snapping Emma out of her trance. She looked around wildly, her pulse racing, but the room was empty. She wasn't alone, though. She could feel it, the presence of the other child, lingering just beyond her vision, laughing at her, mocking her. "Stop it," Emma shouted, her voice cracking. But the laughter only grew louder, more insistent. It filled her ears, her mind, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. She stumbled to her feet, clutching the diary like a lifeline, but it offered no comfort, only more questions, more terror. She fled the attic, the laughter following her down the stairs, through the dark hallways, into every shadowed corner of the house. It echoed in her mind, relentless, driving her to the brink of madness. She saw flashes of the other child, just a glimpse, a shadow darting around a corner, a figure standing at the end of the hall, always smiling that eerie, knowing smile. Desperate for some semblance of sanity, Emma reached out to Tom, but he had already started to pull away. He saw the changes in her, the way her eyes darted around the room, the way she spoke in whispers, as if afraid to be overheard. "Emma, you need help," he told her, his voice tinged with pity. This isn't real." But it was real to Emma. It was all too real. "You don't understand," she whispered, clutching his arm with a fevered intensity. "She's here, Tom. She's trapped, and it's my fault. I have to save her." Tom gently pried her fingers from his arm, his expression pained. "Emma, please, you're not well. Let me call someone." "No." Emma backed away, the fear in her eyes turning to anger. "You think I'm crazy, just like everyone else. But I'm not. I know what I saw, what I hear. She's in the house, Tom, and if I don't help her, she'll—" But the words died in her throat. The laughter returned, this time accompanied by a faint, ghostly image of the other child standing behind Tom, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. Emma blinked, and the image was gone, but the damage was done. Tom stepped back, shaken by the look in her eyes, by the realization that she was slipping further away. Emma turned to Mrs. Whitaker, the old neighbor who seemed to know more than she let on. But even Mrs. Whitaker offered no solace, only a grim warning. "Leave this house, Emma," she said, her voice low and grave. "It'll take you like it took the others. It's not too late." But it was too late. Emma was too deep, too entangled in the house's dark history to walk away. The laughter echoed in her ears, in her dreams, in every waking moment. The shadows in the house grew darker, deeper, and Emma could swear they were moving, shifting as if alive. Objects no longer stayed where she left them. Doors creaked open on their own. The house was coming alive, and it was hungry. Emma knew she had to find a way to free the trapped spirit, or risk being consumed by the house herself. She was no longer sure if she was saving the child, or if the child was pulling her deeper into the madness. The diary had said as much. You can't leave once you're in the game. And Emma had started to fear that there was only one way this game could end. Chapter 6. The Horrifying Truth. Emma's hands trembled as she loaded the old videotape into the dusty VCR she found in the hidden room. The flickering screen cast an eerie glow, illuminating the forgotten corners of the living room. The laughter that had haunted her for weeks now seemed to pulse through the walls, growing louder as the tape began to play. The video was grainy, the colors faded with time, but the image was unmistakable. There, she was a younger version of herself, no older than 8, playing in the backyard. The familiar swing set creaked as it moved back and forth, the laughter of her childhood friend filling the air. But something was wrong. Emma leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat, as she noticed the subtle details. The friend's movements were unnatural, her limbs jerky and stiff, as if she were a puppet on invisible strings. Camera panned, and Emma's mother appeared on the screen, her face pale and strained. She was holding a book, one Emma now recognized as the diary she'd found in the attic. Her mother's lips moved, but there was no sound. The video's audio had been replaced by a low hum, a distorted echo of the laughter that had tormented Emma. Then, the camera caught the friend's reflection in the window, a reflection that was not a child at all, but a monstrous, demonic figure with eyes like burning coals and a twisted, malevolent grin. Emma recoiled in horror, her heart pounding as she realized the truth. The friend had never been real. It was the house, the dark power within it, that had manifested this entity, a creature born of her own fear and loneliness, feeding off her terror. The video shifted again, showing her mother in the attic, surrounded by candles. She was performing a ritual, her voice a soft chant that Emma could barely hear over the now deafening laughter. The ritual, meant to protect her, had failed at least in part. It had bound the entity to the house, but left Emma vulnerable, the laughter a curse that had followed her through the years. Emma's mind raced, piecing together the horrifying truth. The entity had been manipulating her all along, using the laughter to maintain its grip on her soul. It had waited, biding its time, until Emma returned to the house. Now, it sought to reclaim her fully, to break free from its prison and consume her entirely. Panic surged through her, but Emma knew she couldn't afford to lose control. The house was alive, with malevolent energy, the walls seeming to close in around her. She had to act, and fast. She scrambled back to the attic, the laughter now a constant presence, gnawing at the edges of her sanity. With shaking hands, she gathered the items she had uncovered: the diary, the broken mirror, the old toys. Each one felt heavy with meaning. The diary's pages were worn, the ink faded, but one passage stood out, written in her mother's desperate scrawl: to sever the tether, you must face the source. The reflection holds the key. Emma understood. The mirror, it had always been the mirror. The entity's power was tied to its reflection, to the twisted image it showed her as a child. If she could confront it, break the connection, she might have a chance to end the curse for good. With a deep breath, Emma placed the broken mirror in front of her and lit the candles, recreating her mother's ritual. The air grew thick with tension, the shadows in the attic twisting and writhing as if alive. The laughter reached a fever pitch, filling her mind, her very soul. As she began to chant the words from the diary, the mirror's surface rippled, and the entity's reflection appeared a grotesque, mocking version of herself. Emma's voice shook, but she kept chanting, pouring all her fear, anger, and determination into the words. She was done being a victim. This time, she would break free. Chapter 7: The Final Showdown. Emma's heart raced as she prepared for the ritual, her mind a chaotic whirl of fear and determination. The hidden room felt colder than ever, the air thick with dread. She carefully arranged the items she had gathered: the diary, the broken mirror, and the old toys around her. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, their dancing flames creating a macabre spectacle. The ritual's instructions were clear but ominous. Emma had to confront the entity directly, using the counter-ritual to sever the connection between it and the house. Her mother's notes described the process in haunting detail, each step a delicate balance between life and death. As she began the incantation, the house reacted with violent fury. Doors slammed shut with deafening bangs, windows exploded into shards of glass, and the once familiar laughter morphed into guttural, agonized screams. Emma could feel the house's anger, the malevolent energy surging through the walls and floor. The entity manifested before her, a grotesque, twisted version of her childhood friend, its eyes burning with a sinister fire. It floated in the air, its form shifting and writhing as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. The laughter had turned into a cacophony of howls and shrieks, each sound a dagger to Emma's nerves. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps as she fought to focus on the ritual. The entity's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, Emma was flooded with the worst moments of her past failed relationships, lost opportunities, and her own guilt over her mother's death. The entity was using her insecurities against her, trying to break her spirit. She staggered, the weight of her memories almost overwhelming. Tears streamed down her face as she faced the darkest corners of her soul. But amid the turmoil, she found a glimmer of resolve. She remembered her mother's love, the strength she had drawn from her support. Emma had to accept her flaws, forgive herself, and fight back with everything she had. The entity roared, its form twisting and elongating as it reached for her. Emma gritted her teeth and chanted louder, her voice rising above the chaos. The items from the diary, pieces of the broken mirror, fragments of the old toys, were her tools, her weapons against the darkness. The entity lunged, its hand reaching for her, trying to pull her into the mirror. Emma stumbled backward but managed to keep her focus. With a final, desperate cry, she used the diary's instructions to trap the entity. The broken mirror's shards caught the light of the candles, casting a net of reflection around the entity. It howled in fury as the mirror's surface began to glow, the reflections pulling it inward, trapping it in a prison of its own making. The house shook violently, the laughter now a distant echo, as if the entity's power was waning. Emma fell to her knees, exhausted but resolute. The mirror's surface went dark, and the screams faded into an eerie silence. Emma looked around the room, the shadows now still and the air less oppressive. She had won, but at a cost. The house was no longer a prison, but the scars of her battle would remain. As she stumbled out of the hidden room, she knew that while she had faced the darkness, it had changed her forever. She glanced back at the house one last time before stepping out into the fresh night air. The curse was broken, and the laughter was gone, but Emma understood that the true battle had been with her own fears and regrets. The house might be free of its dark power, but the memories would linger haunting, but no longer controlling. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The first rays of dawn filtered through the shattered windows, casting a pale light on the now quiet house. Emma stood in the middle of the living room, the air around her still heavy with the remnants of fear. The entity was gone, its malevolent presence no longer suffocating the space. The silence was profound, almost deafening after the chaos of the night. Emma's body ached from the exertion of the ritual. Her clothes were tattered, her skin smeared with dust and sweat. Her hands shook as she collected the remnants of the ritual broken mirror shards, candles, and the diary. The house, once so full of tormenting energy, now felt strangely empty. It was as if the walls themselves were breathing a sigh of relief. Tom arrived shortly after, his face etched with worry and disbelief. He had seen the damage from the outside, the shattered windows, the broken door, and now, as he entered, he was confronted with the aftermath of Emma's battle. The look of genuine concern and awe in his eyes was a stark contrast to his earlier skepticism. "I knew you weren't crazy," he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry for doubting you." Emma offered him a weak smile, her strength waning. "It's over now, but it's left its mark." Tom nodded, understanding the depth of her pain. He helped her gather her belongings, his hands gentle as he assisted her. The two of them worked together in silence, a newfound bond forming between them. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, but the scars of the ordeal remained both physical and emotional. As they loaded the last of her things into Tom's truck, Emma glanced back at the house one final time. place that had once been her childhood home now seemed like a distant memory, a chapter she was desperate to close. The laughter that had haunted her was gone, but the experience had changed her irrevocably. Tom drove Emma away from the house, the road ahead stretching out like a promise of new beginnings. The sun was rising higher, bathing the landscape in a hopeful light. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She felt a mixture of relief and sadness, relief that the nightmare was over, and sadness for the parts of her life that had been forever altered. As they drove further from the house, Emma heard a faint, eerie echo of the laughter that had tormented her. It was distant, almost too soft to be sure. Her heart skipped a beat, a shiver running down her spine. She turned to Tom, who was focused on the road, unaware of the sound that had reached her ears. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Tom looked at her, confusion on his face. "Hear what?" Emma's gaze drifted back to the road, the laughter now a ghostly memory in the wind. She wasn't sure if it was a trick of her mind or if the entity had somehow survived. A final, lingering thought that perhaps it was still out there, waiting for another opportunity. As the house disappeared from view, Emma felt a chill despite the warmth of the sun. She had escaped the darkness, but she knew it might never truly be gone. The laughter, though faint, was a reminder that some ghosts never entirely leave. With a deep breath, Emma faced the future. She was leaving her past behind, starting anew, but the echoes of her ordeal would remain a haunting reminder of the shadows that lurk in the corners of even the brightest days.